Okay, so this is the last slide that I left off with in the video. And so just a synopsis again, I reviewed overview of mitosis, then I introduced some basic genetic stuff with dominant recessive genes and so on. Do you remember a little bit about that from genetics and biology? And then related that to meiosis, which is the making of egg and sperm cells. And I want to marry genetics with meiosis because meiosis is how those genes are passed on from parent to offspring, which is what genetics is all about. And so at the very end of the video, I was talking about some at the cells at the end of meiosis and how in an egg and a sperm cell you have half the number of chromosomes or one set of chromosomes, and we call that haploid. And so for humans, that is N equals 23. So there's not pairs of chromosomes in our egg and sperm cells. There's one of every type of chromosome. So I left off saying, okay, in an egg cell, they have one of every kind of chromosome, one chromosome number 1, 2, 3, and all the way up to chromosome number 23. And for females making egg cells, human female chromosomes for the sex chromosomes for 23 are homologous, meaning that females have 2 large X chromosomes. So when you make your egg cell, you give either this X chromosome or this X chromosome, but either way, you're giving an X chromosome, you're giving one of those. And so a female is always going to give an X chromosome to her kids via her egg cell. Males, on the other hand, are for their 23rd pair of chromosomes, when males make their sperm cells, they give one of every kind of chromosome, but for the 23rd pair, for human males, those are the only non-homologous chromosomes in us, which means the male has a large X chromosome and a small Y chromosome. And these are a pair, even though they are identical, they have different DNA, different genes on them, and so on. So what happens when making sperm cells is this pair, you only give one of each kind of chromosome from a pair. So therefore males either give the X chromosome or the Y chromosome to their kids. So when they go through meiosis at the end, literally out of the 4 cells at the end, 2 of them will have an X chromosome, 2 of them will have a Y chromosome. So therefore we have either an X sperm or a Y sperm, and these are males make 50% of their sperm each one. Okay, so therefore, how this relates to genetics and fertilization and so on is that it depends upon which of these sperm fertilizes the egg cell. So when you have a baby, mom in her egg cell always gives one of every kind of chromosome, and so she's going to give a one chromosome number 1, one chromosome number 2, and let's say this sperm fertilizes that egg cell, and so this sperm cell has an X chromosome, so this baby is going to have 2 of every kind of chromosome, so 2 number 1s, 2 number 2s, 2 number 3s, all the way up until 2 number 23s. She's going to get an X chromosome from mom and an X chromosome from dad, and this is going to be a baby girl. And so, because she has 2 X chromosomes. If the Y sperm is the one that gets there and fertilizes this egg cell, then we have a different outcome where the baby will still have 1 chromosome number 1 from mom, 1 from dad, 1 number 2 from mom, 1 from dad, all right, and so on and so forth. Baby will always get an X from mom, and then in this case, the baby got a Y from dad, and now you have a baby boy. And so it's the father that determines the gender of the child, depending upon if it's an X sperm or Y sperm that fertilizes the egg cell. And so these 2 here then will be called zygotes, a fertilized egg cell. And then this zygote, let's say the female here, the zygote then will grow into an adult by dividing by what process? Mitosis. So then this will divide by mitosis. Remember, mitosis produces genetically identical cells, and so with in humans that would be 46 chromosomes, so then you'd have 2 cells with 46 chromosomes, and so on. And so we would say that these zygotes are 2N. They're diploid because they have 2 sets of chromosomes, one of every kind that they got from their mom, one of every kind that they got from their dad, so they have 2 of every type. So then 2N, and then to give us a total of how many chromosomes altogether? 46. All right, and so those are your diploid cells. And so that's where we left off. So, so what we're going to look at next is our what we call our sexual life cycle through making egg and sperm cells in a multicellular adult. So at sexual maturity, the ovaries and testes produce haploid gametes. And so, so there are special cells called germ cells in a woman's ovaries. They're the only cells in the body that will reproduce by meiosis and produce the egg cells. And then there are those same types of cells in the testes to produce sperm cells. Gametes are the only types of human cells produced by meiosis rather than mitosis. Every other cell is made by mitosis. Meiosis results in 1 set of chromosomes in each gamete. So here's 1 set from the egg cell, 1 set from the sperm cell. Fertilization, which is the fusing of the gametes, restores the diploid condition, forming a zygote. So you have 2N. Two of every kind, so it has 2 sets. And then this diploid zygote develops into adult by dividing by mitosis. And so this is a picture of our life cycle and how the diploid part of our life cycle and the haploid part. Mine is color coded, yours is not. This part here on the top part is solved that by putting a line here. So this is the haploid part of the life cycle. Or if you have colors, you can make this, the green arrows here. And everything below the line is diploid. So in looking at our life cycle here, we are a multicellular diploid adult. So when we look at our multicellular self, all of our cells are diploid. They have 2 of every kind of chromosome, 1 set that you got from mom, 1 set that you got from dad. Then in females, in the ovaries, in the males, in the testes, there are special cells that divide by meiosis. So here's your meiosis. Meiosis reduces the chromosome number by half. So we go from diploid, or 2N, to N, or haploid. And the egg and the sperm cells are the only 2 cells, as we see here, in this haploid part of our life cycle. This is the egg cell. Ovum is another way to say egg. Also, sometimes you'll see the word ova. That's the plural form. That's multiple eggs. All right, so ovum is 1, ova. So if you see any of that, that's just referring to the egg cell. Notice that this egg is much bigger than the sperm cell. And so when sperm fertilizes the egg cell, each one of these are haploid, fertilization occurs. Now we get our zygote, which is diploid. And so it's 1 cell big, and then that cell begins to divide by mitosis, producing identical cells, and we grow up into a multicellular adult, which then we can then, in the ovaries and testes, divide by meiosis and produce the haploid egg and sperm cells, and so on and so forth. So our haploid part of our life cycle is a very reduced part. It's just the egg and the sperm part here. Now what we're going to see is that not every organism on Earth has a life cycle like ours. So I'm going to show you 2 different other types of life cycles. So a variety of sexual life cycles. The alternation of meiosis and fertilization is common to all organisms that reproduce sexually. So we have an alternation of meiosis and fertilization. That was part of our meiosis, produced the haploid gametes, and then the fertilization occurred. So it's in all organisms that reproduce sexually. So sexual reproduction means that you have 2 different parents, each contribute genes to the offspring so that the offspring has a new combination of genes that's different than either parent. So you have a new set of genes there. New combination, I should say. So that's different than asexual reproduction. So like bacteria. Bacteria are only 1 cell big. Bacteria, they can divide by binary fission, where they just make a copy of their 1 chromosome, they make a copy of it, and then divide in two, and now there's two bacteria. That's how they reproduce. And these two bacteria at the end are clones of one another. There wasn't another, parent that introduced new genes, so they're genetically identical. So that would be an example of asexual reproduction. So this is sexual reproduction. The main there are three main types of sexual life cycles. And it says that they differ, though, in their timing of meiosis and fertilization. So they all have meiosis, they all have fertilization, but when this occurs is different. So in us, so this basically is just going to go through what happens in us. In animals, meiosis produces gametes, which undergo no further cell division before fertilization. Gametes are the only haploid cells in animals. And they fuse to form a diploid zygote that divides by mitosis to develop into a multicellular organism. So it's just putting into words what I just talked about with our life cycle. So this picture here, this life cycle on the left where it says animals, this is the same as what we just looked at with humans. They didn't draw in the multicellular humans and so on, but it's the way that you're looking at this and how it cycles through is the same. So here's your adult humans, male and female. All the cells are diploid. Cells in the ovaries and testes divide by meiosis to make the gametes. Gametes come together in fertilization to get your zygote, divide by mitosis to make your multicellular organism. All right, so that's what we just talked about. Meiosis and fertilization happens in both of them. Notice here, this is for plants and fungi. They also have meiosis and fertilization in here. But as we wrote that the timing is different. So let's look at plants. So plants, here's your diploid multicellular organism called a sporophyte. What does this mean? All the cells, when you look at the organism, all the cells are diploid. And so they have two of every kind of chromosome. They divide by meiosis, so this is similar to us. We have diploid multicellular organism. We have cells that divide by meiosis. But when our cells divide by meiosis, they make gametes. Look at what happens in the plants. This divides by meiosis and it forms spores. So meiosis is producing spores, which are also haploid. So meiosis reduces the chromosome number by half. That's what happened, but instead of the outcome being gametes, the outcomes are these things called spores. Spores, what happens is spores can be released and actually divide and grow into another type of multicellular organism called a gametophyte. So here we have a diploid multicellular organism and a haploid multicellular organism. Notice here that these spores can divide by mitosis. What does mitosis do? It just makes cells exactly like your first cell. So when you divide by mitosis, however many chromosomes was in that first cell, that's going to be in the two cells at the end. So if you have a cell with N, half the number of chromosomes, when you divide by mitosis, you're going to have two cells that have half the number of chromosomes divided by N. And this grows into a multicellular organism. So therefore, in plants, you have these two stages of a multicellular organism. And then what happens is this multicellular organism is what produces the gametes. So notice here, this multicellular organism is haploid. Gametes are also haploid. So therefore, if you have a haploid organism needing to make haploid gametes, do they have to go through meiosis to make their gametes? No, they're already half the number of chromosomes. And so therefore, they make their gametes by mitosis. So mitosis makes the gametes, and you get these haploid gametes, which then fuse in fertilization to form a zygote, and then that zygote can divide and form your multicellular diploid organism. Let me give you an example of this happening in a plant. I'm going to use the ferns. You guys know what I'm talking about with fern plants, okay? So fern, when you think of a fern, this is an attempt to draw here. So here's your fern plant, and then it has all these little leaves, right? All right, you know what I'm talking about? All right. So this is one little sprig of your fern plant. So all of these little leaves, they're called fronds. And if I were to enlarge that, if we look at the thickness of it, so this is the thickness. On the underside of it, so this is the thickness of it. On the other side, there's these little sacs. And what happens is this fern, this is this part right here. So this is the diploid multicellular organism. So all of this in green, this is diploid. So if I were to look at the cells of a fern, they have 2 of every kind of chromosome, all right? And so they're diploid. What happens is there are cells in these sacs here that are diploid, but these cells divide by meiosis to make these haploid spores. So what happens is there are cells in here that start to divide by meiosis and reduce the chromosome number, and so now we have these haploid spores. So in red, so these guys are haploid spores. So then imagine that, so this is all underneath all the leaves, and so you have these little sacs with these haploid spores. What happens is these sacs burst open, and these spores can go and be carried by the wind and so on, and eventually can drop on the ground. So what happens is you get a little haploid spore, drop on the ground, and this haploid spore, what it can do, right here in the life cycle, is it can start to divide by mitosis. So what is it going to do? It's going to make more haploid cells. So it's going to make more and more haploid cells, and it's going to grow into a haploid multicellular organism. A lot of people don't know this about ferns, so because you have to really look at this multicellular part. But what happens is the spore that lands in the ground, as it divides and makes more haploid cells, it eventually forms kind of like a little heart-shaped leaf on the surface of the ground. All right, so you have to look for it. All right, people don't even think of it when they think of ferns, and so they have this heart-shaped leaf, and so then if another spore landed here, we'd have another one. All right, and it's supposed to be lying flat on the ground. It doesn't. My spatial drawing is not very well. Very good there, but these heart-shaped leaves, and so that's what this is. This is your haploid multicellular organism. This is called a gametophyte. Why is it called a gametophyte? It makes gametes. So this is already haploid. So then there are cells in this leaf that begin to divide by mitosis and make egg and sperm cells. So this one can make egg cells, and this one can make sperm cells. And then what happens is the sperm, if you have a layer of water, they rely on water. If you think about where ferns grow, they're usually in darker shaded areas, and that's in damp areas. And so, so the reason why is they rely on water for fertilization. The sperm actually can swim and fertilize the egg. So the sperm is N, the egg is N. So when the sperm fertilizes the egg, then what happens is then you get a 2N zygote, and then it starts dividing by mitosis, and you get a new fern plant growing up there. And so then your fern plant would be diploid, all right? And so that's what there's the sperm fertilizing the egg, your zygote, and then you go back to your fern plant. So, so ferns, if you've ever grown them, they can take over an area pretty quickly because they drop all these spores from them, and then you get these little ferns popping up all over the place because of that. And so this shows you that there are 2 multicellular parts to it. And because of this, they call this the alternation of generations. So they alternate between haploid and diploid. Well, it's just generation. So it's unique there. And then lastly, we have the fungus, and so the fungus, so like a mushroom, this is the case. And so let's start here with the gametes. So here are your haploid gametes. They fuse, that's fertilization, and you get your zygote. Notice here what happens. The zygote immediately never divides by mitosis like us. Our zygote divides by mitosis and we become a multicellular diploid organism. In a fungus, the zygote is formed. The zygote immediately divides by meiosis, immediately. So here's your zygote, divides by meiosis, and so what you end up with is 4 cells that are haploid. You have some haploid cells at the end. Then these haploid cells start dividing by mitosis, and that's what you get is your mushroom. When you look at a mushroom, all the cells of the mushroom are haploid. They only have one of every kind of chromosome. All right, and so so that's the only multicellular part of their life cycle. So then they're haploid, so then they can make their gametes by mitosis, and the zygote is really reduced on the 2 end. This is the only part of the life cycle that's diploid. All right, so in looking at this and how they are similar and different is that they all have meiosis and fertilization, but like I said, the timing of when meiosis and fertilization occurs makes them different. What also makes them different is the multicellular part of it. So the multicellular part is all of our cells are diploid. In plants, they alternate between diploid and haploid multicellular part. And in fungi, the multicellular part is haploid, okay? And so that's what makes another thing that's different between us. All right. So we're just gonna write here about the similarities and differences. The organisms in B and C, that was the plant and the fungus, have slightly different life cycles. There are some similarities. The similarities are they reduce their chromosome number by half, chromosome halving, and doubling contribute to genetic variation in offspring. So chromosome halving, what part of the life cycle are we talking about here? What part is that? Meiosis, right? So this is meiosis, reducing the chromosome number by half. And then the chromosome number also doubles in each one of these life cycles. That's not mitosis. Mitosis, they already have 2 of every kind of chromosome. Mitosis doesn't double your chromosome numbers. Fertilization. So when fertilization doubles it, when the gametes come together. All right, so what we're going to look at next is the actual process of meiosis and look a little bit more in depth about what occurs to get your 4 haploid cells at the end. So like mitosis, meiosis is preceded by the replication of chromosomes. So you have to replicate the DNA. It takes place in 2 sets of cell divisions that I talked about on the video, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. And you get, at the end, you get your 4 daughter cells rather than the 2 daughter cells at the end of mitosis. So that's one of the difference there. Each daughter cell has only half as many chromosomes as the parent cell. And so that's another difference between mitosis and meiosis. So there are stages of meiosis. So in the first cell division, meiosis 1, the homologous chromosomes separate. Meiosis 1 results in 2 haploid daughter cells with replicated chromosomes. In the second cell division, which is meiosis 2, sister chromatids separate. And meiosis 2 results in 4 haploid daughter cells with unreplicated chromosomes. So we have this picture that shows you this. So look at. Yep, I can go back. Okay, so this is it's kind of cut off here, but it's in interphase. What happens in interphase here is the same thing that happens in interphase and mitosis. So you have the G1, S, and G2 phases, and in the S phase, the DNA is replicated. So that's what we see here. So this is a diploid cell because we have, these are supposed to be a homologous set of chromosomes here. So there's one piece of DNA, so remember this represents a piece of DNA. And so during the S phase of interphase, each piece of DNA is replicated. So that's what we see here. So here's the one side and here's the other side. This side that I'm drawing right now is an exact piece of DNA that's an exact copy of this piece of DNA. Let me point out here that this right here is one chromosome made out of two sister chromatids held together at the centromere. All right, so that's one chromosome, and then this piece of DNA is copied. So here's the copy, making the second chromosome. So these guys here are a homologous pair of chromosomes. So this could be like pair number 1. All right, we have 23 pairs. And so the DNA is replicated, then condensed to form chromosomes. And so here are your two chromosomes that are the replicated chromosomes. So then what happens in meiosis 1 is that the homologous chromosomes separate. So how does that happen? It has to do with the way that they line up in the cell. So they line up with their partners, and the spindle or the microtubules attach one from either side to each of the chromosomes. So notice here this red chromosome only has a microtubule. Since it's on the right-hand side, it only has a microtubule from the right-hand side attached. The one on the left only has one on the left attached. The reason why is because when those microtubules shorten and pull the chromosomes to the opposite sides of the cell, we want the pairs to separate into different cells. So therefore we have the blue chromosome made out of the two sister chromatids on the left, and we have the red chromosome made out of the two sister chromatids on the right. So therefore, these cells do not have pairs of chromosomes right now. The pairs were separated into different cells. So then, we're not done here. Why are we not done with meiosis? Because these cells still have double the DNA. They still have two of these pieces of DNA that you originally started out with instead of one. And so therefore we separate the chromatids. And so here they line up, and in this case here, the spindle attaches one from either side and pull the sister chromatids apart, so that at the end you get exactly half of the DNA that you started out with at the beginning. So you get one of the piece of DNA that makes up chromosome number 1 at the end. All right, and so therefore that's what we have. So in this case here, this cell at the beginning, haploid or diploid? This one's diploid. All right, why? Because it has a pair. Okay, so it's diploid. So what letter represents, what's the 2N? So this is a 2N. And then what am I going to put for equal? For this particular cell, not our cells, 2N equals 2 in this cell. They only show one pair, right? Yes.
Okay, so I have a question about like the process.
Okay.
Why does it double, split, and then split again? Why doesn't it just split from the very first cell?
Why doesn't it split from the
So
very
where instead of getting 4, you'd only have 2. Is that just like an efficiency thing?
Instead of, what do you mean instead of?
Okay, so it, in interphase, why can't it just skip interphase and meiosis and then just go like or meiosis 1? Why can't it just go straight from the 2N down to N?
Why can't it go from here to here?
No, the first one, the
Here?
very top, and only have 2.
Oh, why does it double at all? Why doesn't it just
Right.
DNAs? That's a good question. I don't know. There are some advantages for doing this. We're going to talk about crossing over and increasing genetic variation. So there is some advantages to doing this process here that you wouldn't get had if you did that. All right. So, having those advantages is basically the only thing I can think of in terms of why that would be. So we're going to talk about that next here. So 2N is equal to 2 here. So these guys here, the DNA replicates, And in this case here,